interesting words. Let me illustrate this with these two, with some more examples. The contemporary cartoons that this. So here you have हमारे railway stationों का दृश्य. A scene at our railway station depicts Hindu women from respectable middle class family standing at the railway station, being lecherously stared by men traveling in the train and standing on the platform. The caption below states, "The appearance of women without veil at the station is like a thunderbolt." Here is a common depiction of how everyone, railway officials, passengers, coolies, and vendors, stare and expect to allure them. The next cartoon, Purush Samaj, Station Par, Men Folk at the railway station, has a gentleman oogling at a women's compartment. His headgear is falling off in excitement. Both the images convey more than the captions suggest. Along with caricaturing lecherous men, the cartoon implicitly urges men to stop staring and harassing women train travelers. In these illustrations, unveiled young women walk and travel despite harassment, often without male company. They are unlike the Chitrakala and Priyamvada, the 19th century novel heroines. They don't keep their desire for interaction and intimacy confined to their absorption in the characters in the book they read or pretend to read. They don't use books as a novel form of parda to hide away from the predatory male gaze. If I forgot to mention earlier that the heroine Chitrakala of Nutan Charitra, in order to avoid male gaze, she basically starts reading. So in that context, I'm talking about. Instead, so unlike them, the 19th century heroines, the 20th century depictions, women chatter among themselves, moving ahead with their raised heads and unveiled faces. At times, they ignore sleazy men by turning their back on them. At others, they look back with brave faces and with perhaps clenched fist on staring men. The next cartoon is Platform Parasnan, bathing at railway station or shower on the platform. It ridicules the stupidity of Marwari businessman obsessed with ritual purity. It shows him, or perhaps a Pani Pandey, a Brahmin water server, whom he instructs while seated inside the train compartment, pouring water over his wife as he squats on the platform. The wife appears unwilling and even resistant as she sits partially shrouded under a veil. Perhaps she is irked at the lack of a private bathing space and her husband's crude behavior. In the background, Indian men inside the train and English men on the platform stare and laugh. I'll cite several more cartoons that capture a critical attitude to behavior of Indian male travelers. Say, for example, in this Yahan or Wahan ke Sabhyayatri, civilized travelers here and there, comparing Indian and European travel scenes. This depicts Indian men as disrespectful, staring at women travelers, and refusing to offer a seat to a standing woman. In Europe, in contrast, a man offers his seat to a women passenger with chivalrous gesture. What is more, unlike the Indians in this cartoon, European men appear caught up in their own affairs, exhibiting no intrusive focus on beautiful women passengers. Rail Yatra mein, in the train journey, shows the duplicity and sexual cunning of Indian men by contrasting their attitude to their own wife and to other women. In the course of train journey, Indian men sleep comfortably without an iota of concern for the comfort of their wives and children. However, they are quick to relinquish their personal comfort for the comfort of other women's children, other women and children. Though the cartoon suggests perhaps only to keep a lecherous eye on them. How despicable are Indian men in these cartoons? Here, the cartoon seeks to change their outlook, urging them to respect the women of their own family and conduct themselves civilly to stranger women. It is not only a liberal, pro-women outlook which criticized the lecherous Indian male. There often an overlap with reformist literary discourses that viewed erotic literature, especially pre-modern Sringar erotic poetry, as responsible for India's moral and cultural decline. Men's predatory behavior was often linked to a cheap and misplaced sense of aesthetics deriving from such decadent literary sources. This is clearly reflected in the following cartoon. The cartoon that you see on the screen, Ras Gyan or Nari Samman, knowledge of rasa and women's respect. As well as in a remarkable story come Bellis letters by Sipujan Sahai. In the first plate, the cartoon, I'm talking about the cartoon now, cartoon depicts a smoking man who is deeply engrossed in the rasa of reading Sringar or traditional erotic poetry. Reading conjures a beautiful maiden who saturates and overpowers his imagination and conveyed through the image balloon that you see. The next plate describes the social consequences of reading such literature. The Rasik oogling a woman alighting from a tram or perhaps ikka as the very embodiment of this erotic poetic imagination. In an interesting coincidence itself, suggestive of how fertile this question of critique of erotic poetry was, Sipujan Sahai's prose makes the same point in actually the same ornamental idiom of Sringara literature. The text, which you can read here, exposes a modern Rasik of literature with Chandra Mohan Babu. Chandra Mohan Babu visits the railway station every day and peeps into the first class compartment to leer at the young women and beautiful women sitting inside. The text, however, appears to do something more than just registering one's, again, the railway station as significant modern site of carnal spectatorship. It underlines that the young man's lascivious behavior stems not only from a generalized modern corruption, but in its combination with a decadent literary connoisseurship of old vintage. It is scathing in its attack on Chandra Mohan's cheap attempt to do Naksik Varnan, highlighting the voluptuousness of women's body on the pretext of doing aesthetic appreciation of Sringara Rasa in the now. My juxtaposing of these two, that is the cartoon with Sahai's prose, is to suggest that the attempt to reform the lecherous Indian Hindu men, faced with the allure of seeing women in public spaces, combines in this case with the exorciation of a corrupting erotics with a longer history. The combination of the old and the new is here staged within the laboratory of the train or the speed carriage. But we may consider that the problem of male gaze towards educated mobile women without parda may have derived from more than one outlook or genealogy. Now I'll move towards conclusion. In most representations from early 20th century onwards, the caste anxiety about food and touch is no longer publicly expressed vis-a-vis the lower castes, Muslims, etc. In fact, a turn towards privatization and hygienization of caste anxiety can be perceived to be happening at the general level of practice. Travelers carry their own food, buying only fruits, sweets, and occasionally tea during the journey. It is as if through disciplined and restrictive consumer practices, caste practices re-inscribed into a public space that is at once shared and separate, the boundary being the body itself, secured from the contamination of food cooked by others. However, there was a tendency for such senses of purity and pollution to be sublimated into the overarching discourse of hygiene. Anecdotal references in the memoir of the time indicate that even if one was indiscriminate about what one ate or drank on the journey in the train, washing and cleaning oneself immediately before taking a meal or on reaching the destination was considered imperative. Perhaps a cleaning of the self from the impurities of the train travel and consumption. Anyway, what we also notice is that this problem of ruckus and the problem of hypermobility and the cluelessness how to deal with it, that is the problem of railway, takes a backseat. It mutates into the question of class discrimination. The earlier salience given to the racial discrimination is now diffused as a form of class discrimination, as Hindustan Ki Railgadi Ka Teesra Darja, the cartoon suggested, and even this particular cartoon that you saw on the slide suggests. So here is a cartoon satirizing railway manners, focus increasingly on class question. All are customers, all are Indians, but dignity and respect is allocated differentially, sometimes not at all. This cartoon strip juxtaposing the class prejudice displayed in the manner of railway officials is self-explanatory. Different treatment to different class of passengers. Certain thematic strands continue, of course, in a modified way. One such is the railways as the space of sociability, of romantic encounters, possibility of meeting strange, eccentric, and funny characters. The question of chance or coincidence is significant here, as indicated in the title of a wonderful reformist love story, Sanjog, which was written by Anup Lal Mandal, published in Chand in October 1931. So to summarize it very briefly, in this story, young men and women meet on the train, communicate through symbolic exchanges, reading and sharing each other's book, separate, of course, on the journey's conclusion, only to meet up later near a college. They fall in love. In the end, the poor but educated boy marries the girl, despite coming to know that her mother was a former prostitute. The other continuing strand is the discursive mapping of railway space as a microcosm of Indian society and politics. While this is sketchily visible in the earlier novel that I referred to, Others Hindu, in which the protagonist Pandit Priyanath enters into conversation with fellow passengers belonging to different caste, communities, and professions, while a regional and social and linguistic multiplicity is thus mapped, it is done with a specific purpose in mind, to establish, in Others Hindus' case, the claim of Sanskritized Hindi as a language of inter-regional and national communication. Be that as it may, this theme that the railway as a microcosm of Indian society and its heterogeneity, etc. This theme becomes prominent in the prose narrative of 1940s and after. One very interesting example I'll just mention and move on. So you have a very less heavy-handed mapping of the national here, and that is Harimohan Jha's Rail Ki Baat, the Maithili story writer, and who is widely translated in Hindi and read, very popular, and so forth. So this Rail Ki Baat, the talk of the train, is about romance of food, that is gastronomic, as well as sexual transgression, that unifies the culturally diverse India, which is embodied in this story in the young Punjabi, Bengali, and Malayali couples who are traveling together in the first-class compartment of the train. So the progressive couples in the story not only exchange food among themselves, but also, it is suggested, and very clearly so, swap their spouses in the overnight journey. It should be noted that this story, originally composed in Maithili, but also popular in Hindi translation, was written in the post-independent confident Nehruvian decade. And finally, the other strand that continued, of course, with new density and dimension, is the gender question. So that you have seen, the railway space is one of male spectatorship populated by Indian travelers, bystanders, vendors, vagabonds, and the attempt here is to continue to reimagine railway space to make it congenial for women. Yeah? So to conclude, since the late 19th century, our ideas and practices have been profoundly transformed by the incorporation of new and ever-changing technologies into our daily existence. Railways and many other technologies perhaps became thoroughly integral component mediating our social consciousness and constituting new subjectivities. What is more, the railways acquired an enduring presence that extended into what the historian of sociologist of science technology, Sheila Jasonov, says that the railway entered into the dreamscape of India's modernity. Say, for example, modern technology remained central to the utopian imagination of egalitarian and just social order in the future centuries. The imagination, the utopian imagination, which was powered by the anti-colonial nationalist quest and also the emancipatory promise of socialism in the wake of Bolshevik revolution. I'll end this presentation. I'm certainly going to end this with one last example from none other than Rahul Sankrityayan. Rahul Sankrityayan's futurist or utopian novel, 22वीं सदी, which is about the future of India and the world, it poses the question that how India or the world itself will look after 200 years of complete democratization of social and political and cultural life, collectivization of production, end of private property, demise of imperialism, complete decimation of hierarchy of class, race, caste, etc. The pacification of social and political order, which will be marked by complete demilitarization of the world and so forth. Be that as it may, in Sankrityayan's vision, modern technology remains central and constitutive of humanity's progress. And railway, of course, again crops up, is imagined as the key technology of free, comfortable, and swift mobility in radical contrast to the to its history or historical experience under colonialism. To put it very briefly, Sankrityayan imagines the railway up to 20th century as follows. The compartments are no longer segregated by class or even divided along gender lines. It was a dream of architectural and spatial equality and cultural cosmopolitanism. The passengers travel without hassle. The stations are no longer sites of spectatorship, din and crowd. Train compartments appear as intimate spaces, small, cozy, moving houses, unaffected by weather outside and insulated from human noise and the creak of machine. So, of course, AC compartments were not there at that time, but he imagines. Trains have amazingly clean toilets, hygienic pantries, even a mini hospital. From the comfortable layout of this transportation technology that extends into the future, the protagonist, the hero or the narrator, undertakes a panoramic survey of the heterogeneous geography of economically and politically equal people and landscape of India. Something which was impossible in the colonial times, where one could barely peep out of the window from the cramped compartment.